Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm trying to pay attention and not just scroll through my data while I figure out if there's anything more I want to add at the last second.
Yes, you and I, classic procrastinators, like, oh, wait, I did want to add one more thing. You always got to go right up to the wire on it. You always just got to, it's like, oh, there's one more thing I got to add. One more little change I got. Just now I was like, are you ready? Ready to start? And you were like, yeah. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm not ready to start. Let me throw one more thing in there. But yeah.
Are you typing stuff while you're asking me if I'm ready to start?
Exactly, yeah. And I was like, oh, wait, I didn't actually end up adding that little number that I wanted to, reference. But anyway, we are here today, you and I, one of our many off-season episodes. Like we mentioned earlier, we'll be doing one episode every single week of the off-season, talking about the draft, talking about free agency. And speaking of free agency, today we are talking about, we each brought 5 players that we think that the Packers are going to be most interested in, or at least that we think the Packers should
be interested in.
Yeah, should be most interested in going into free agency. And this is a combination of a few things. Number one, availability. I think both of us really wanted to put guys like T. Higgins. You might have ended up putting T. Higgins in, but I don't want to spoil it. Oh, okay, well, you're going to go ahead and spoil
it. But for example, Devontae Adams, who's not currently a free agent.
Doesn't apply. And, there's some other players where it's like, oh, it'd be great if they got them, but I don't think they're going to be able to afford them. I don't think it's realistic. I don't know if it's a good fit. So it's not necessarily just the 5 best players available in free agency. It's not necessarily just the 5 best fits. It's a combination of player, talent level, fit, and price. So players that we think the Packers should target, because I got what I'll tell you now, I have like a depth lineman that I think would just be a good fit for the Packers. That's shouldn't be very expensive, and they should just maybe Billy Turner-esque signing in some ways. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
They didn't have as much success with last year as they had previous years. We had Billy Turner was a multi-year, but the single year like Dennis Kelly, Rick Wagner.
Kelly was, I think, less successful, although played more than Dillard. So
it was more successful than Dillard. We were able to get games out of him.
Yeah.
And what's his name?
Who are you trying to remember now?
Big giant dude that we actually signed a second time, but then he had COVID and couldn't play in the playoffs.
Oh goodness, it's not. Why do I want to say? I want to say Voorhees. It's not Voorhees because that's the guy from Friday the 13th. I know.
Yeah, we need Jason Voorhees.
Exactly.
On the offensive line.
I mean, he's also a giant and also probably could play some offensive line. I know exactly who you're talking about though, because he also used to play for the Colts for a little bit.
Yep.
He's been around for. Oh man, what is his name?
Okay, I couldn't actually remember it, but I found it in my list of Packers testing numbers. Jared Veldheer, that's the one. Yes, and he was I was trying to think of him yesterday too. I was like,
exactly. But to circle back to what we were talking about, all of those guys contributed more than Dillard did last year. Although, in some ways that's more a product, I think, of the availability of Walker and Tom for most of the year, and just having snaps available for them. Although Dillard was inactive for some of these games, so. Maybe not. But anyway, so we're going to talk all about the free agents that we think are good fits for the Packers, like we mentioned. Before we get into any of that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come, subscribe. We'd really appreciate it, whether that's, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review, tell a friend. We would really appreciate it. Help our numbers. Like we mentioned, we'll be doing an episode every single week for the entire offseason. A lot of stuff on the draft. We love the draft. My favorite time of the year. My dad's favorite time of the year. Hope springs eternal during the draft. Nothing can go wrong. You can always talk yourself into the fact that you had a good draft until you actually see the players on the field. And then, then you'll learn that it was not, or that it really was a good draft. You never know. But anyway, like we said, we'll be talking all about the draft, talking all about free agency when it happens. That'll be March 10th to 12th. We'll be talking all about, the coaching staff, OTAs, minicamp, training camp. But like we mentioned, an episode every single week for the entire offseason. So like we said, subscribe, follow us on Blue Sky at Father-Son Packer. We tweet out whenever, or skeet out, whatever verbiage we're using now for that. Post out, skeet out. I like skeet out. But anyway, we'll be posting out whenever we have new episodes out. So check that out. But anyway, should we just get into this, Dad? Because there aren't really a whole lot of news items for the Packers right now. Pretty quiet time of the year. We talked about last week, what we thought about the coaching staff hires with, Covington, Dugan being promoted, Manningham being promoted. So if you want to check out our thoughts on that, go ahead and check out the last episode, 177. But I think, let's just get into first talking about, where the Packers sit as free agency, is about like 3 weeks away, 3-4 weeks away. Where they sit in terms of cap space, where they sit in terms of which players are coming and going. Dad, go ahead and take it away on that.
Okay, and so I went through the trouble to figure out what their cap space is, and then I totally ignored it when I was making my free agent list.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, what cap? What?
The thing is, the moral of the story on the cap, which you'll get into the details of, they should have plenty of money to go after pretty much whoever they want. The question is just how they want to allocate that money, whether or not they want to bring in a few different mid-sized ones, whether they want to really spend on one guy. They should have plenty of cap space this offseason.
They can sign any one individual.
Yes,
they're not how high in the market. They cannot sign the top two highest in the market, most likely. That would be, I think, not feasible. But right now, according to Over the Cap, Green Bay is currently at about $42 million under the cap, and significantly more in 2026. Now, all the scuttlebutt and that Jair is not going to be with the team.
It seems
next
like
year.
It, yeah.
So if he is either traded or cut before the draft, that would put Green Bay at $48 million under the cap for 2025 and $95 million under the cap in 2026.
I just got to stop buying jerseys, is what I've decided. I have a Jair jersey, an Aaron Jones jersey. I got you that Za'Darius jersey, and I have a Devontae Adams jersey that my friends very kindly gave to me.
I'm only going to get Packers jerseys of players who are already retired.
Exactly, yeah. No, it's just there's no other way around it. I have to stop getting current players' jerseys. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, and so their draft picks will cost them about a net of $4 million. So $10 million for the salary slots, but it'll be offset by about $6 million in salaries that those spots would replace. And then they need maybe about $10 million to $12 million for in-season costs, practice squad, signings, etc., leaving about $34 million for signing free agents. And that's just year one. They have more in year two, though there'll be some additional costs of extensions for people like Zach Tom, for example, almost certainly.
Yeah, and those extensions will also probably free up some money. They can structure these contracts very creatively to free up money or push it out.
Right. So if somebody's averaging like $20 million a year one is not going to be $20 million.
Exactly. And another thing,
Packers.
And another thing to remember, just in the NFL in general, rule of thumb, all these contracts really are 2-year deals, and then we'll see. Almost all of them are 2-year deals, and then we'll restructure, or 2-year deals, and then we'll release and eat some money. 2-year deal, like most of these contracts, the way that they are is there's an out after 2 years, and that's usually the way you want to think about it.
Yeah, and they don't. And the players, the agents, still want that big number.
Yes, it's got to look good.
If it's not actually.
And
real.
When you see a number reported, it almost always includes all of the incentives, all of the non-guaranteed. What really matters is the guaranteed money, and then remember that guaranteed money is usually just look at it for over 2 years. But the length doesn't really matter. The non-guarantees don't really matter. That money is fake money, and it usually doesn't even end up getting paid out. But anyway, so that's kind of where the Packers sit cap-wise, right? They should have a good amount of money left. The main thing you need to know out of all those details is they're going to have plenty of money, but they do have some players heading out the door, Dad, and a lot of snaps heading out the door, don't they?
Yeah, but not compared to a lot of other teams. There are not that many roster spots that they need. They do have some starters that are leaving or expected to leave. Josh Myers, the most snaps at over 1,000 at center. TJ Slayton, he's they're basically starting run-stopping D tackle with 457 snaps, but almost exclusively a run stopper, not adding much in the pass rush. Jair, their number one corner, but he only played 361 snaps and missed the last 7 games of the year. Not guaranteed to be leaving, but generally expected based on comments from multiple sides.
Yeah.
2 of their starting linebackers, or 2 of their top 4 linebackers, let's say.
Yeah.
Isaiah McDuffie with 728 snaps and Eric Wilson with 559. And we'd expect a decent number of those to be taken by Edgerrin Cooper. We don't yet know what we have in Hopper. So there's a pretty good possibility they'll add a linebacker somewhere.
Yeah, I would say
probably the draft.
Expecting at least one linebacker in the draft. It wouldn't surprise me at all. At least one.
Yeah. And then Eric Stokes, 558 snaps at corner. But he only played 6 snaps combined in the last 2 games. So they were basically playing without him over the last 2 games of the year already.
Yeah, exactly.
And then their kicker, Brandon McManus.
And the thing is, if I'm ranking, the thing with McManus, It sounds like they want to bring him back. It sounds like they're going to bring him back. I would be surprised if they didn't. The one that I'm most interested to just chat about briefly, Josh Myers. I'm putting it at 50-50. What would you say? I would say 50-50 he comes back or not.
I'm going to put it at higher than 50.
Higher than 50 that he's back? You think like...
That he's back, just because the way the Packers have always talked about it.
They love him.
So,
they love him a lot.
2-1, 67. Give it a 67%, even though I think they could do better. And I have a suggestion.
I know you do. We'll talk about that briefly, but I do think they seem to love him. It's just one of those guys where it's like there are always these guys that the Packers seem to love more than their play dictates, more than the fans' opinion,
the pundits,
and
reporters.
It's like so who is in that all-star team of like Packers love these guys? It's like Dean Lowry is like I think like a poster child for this. Keyshawn Nixon in some ways is like this, although I think he actually played his way out of that.
I think
tier.
But
before this past year, I would say he was in that tier. I think he played his way out of that tier this year.
Martinez,
Blake Martinez, although they didn't end up bringing him back after a rookie year, so I think they never actually gave him that extension. But they're definitely these guys where it's just like, yeah, the Packers just really like these guys. Kevin King was, I think, definitely one. The fact that they gave him that extension was wild at the time, and then just also looked terrible also. But yeah, they're always these guys that the Packers just seem to love, and I think it's a combination of who they are in the locker room, which we'll never actually know. The off the field stuff in terms of getting everyone prepped and being a leader in the locker room, and their film study and their impact. And I think especially at the center position, that stuff matters more than at other positions, like the ability to set the protections, the ability to game plan throughout the week, the comfortability in the, one of the things that Gutekunst highlighted was, how comfortable Jordan Love is with him at center. So I would not be surprised if they brought him back. You've talked me into it. I think I'm more at 60-40 also.
Yeah, I think it's more likely than not. I don't know if I think there might be a better plan, but you mentioned, you reminded me that he was looking better the first half of the year until he suffered that torn pec that we heard about after the year was over.
Yeah, which we didn't hear about until after the year was over, which, in some ways, testament to him playing through it. It wasn't like a full pec tear. It was like a minor pec tear. But hey, if we're splitting hairs on a pec tear, like that probably still hurts a lot. And there was clearly like a point where it's like, oh, he was substantially worse down the stretch than he was to start the season.
Yeah, so that maybe is actually getting better, like they say.
They always say he's playing some of his best football. I feel like I've heard that every single year of Josh Myers' career. He's playing the best football of his career.
And you know what I say to that? It's like
low bar,
right? Like so
yeah, it's like okay.
the saying is like Grandpa Bobby, you say this like the optimist thinks this is the best of all possible worlds, and the pessimist is afraid that the optimist is right.
Yeah, that's like I actually never heard Grandpa Baba say that, but that's actually a pretty good poll. But anyway, since we're done, I think we're pretty much done talking about the Packers' potential free agents. I think McManus seems like kind of a lock to be back. I think Myers, I'm with you on 60-40 is back. Kind of just depends on the money and what other offers he gets. I wouldn't be surprised to see Eric Wilson back. I don't think that really changes anything about what their plans should be. I just think they really like him in the locker room, and he's a good special teamer. And, he's not a great linebacker, but I think he just got thrust into a role he didn't need to be in. And the fact that he was still able to be passable as a third linebacker, even though not fantastic, is more just a testament to like, hey, like it's not his fault. He's not a great third linebacker. He's not supposed to be a third linebacker. He's supposed to be your fourth or fifth guy and be a special teamer. The fact that he played like slightly below average at linebacker is like more than you should be asking of him. So I wouldn't be surprised, and nor would I hate if they brought him back at like a low number, just like they did last offseason, which, they just did last year. So, but let's start talking about.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if they brought back either one of their
Wilson or McDuffie.
Yeah, either one of them.
Yeah, I would expect Wilson back more so than McDuffie. Slayton, he's important to the run defense, but I just think that they're not going to pay real money for,
I guess the question is, what is he going to get on the open market? I think they need somebody like Slayton.
Yeah, but I don't think that type of player is super valuable. So I think that they can, find a way. I think they can find a way to fill that role with like just a guy off the street for a minimum or something like that. But maybe Slayton's that guy off the street for a minimum. Maybe he doesn't get a lot of offers.
I don't know what Slayton is expected to get.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. But anyway, let's start talking a little bit about our free agent targets and who we want the Packers to take a look at in this free agent class. Like we mentioned, price should not be too prohibitive for the Packers. They should have a good deal of cap space available to go after whoever they want. But Dad, I will, and one thing I wanted to mention, just so you have some dates in your mind, the free agency negotiating window is March 10th to 12th, so still about a month away. But we're probably going to start hearing some rumblings about, who's going where about a week or two from now and who's going to be available, et cetera, et cetera. But March 10th to 12th is the official negotiating window. After that they can actually sign, but we'll know all the pretty much lined up, who's going where by March 11th, pretty much.
And some cuts might be happening in the next couple of weeks from around the league, or
exactly
as teams get ready for the new year. The funny about the free agency, it is one time a year where big news happens in the middle of the night. It comes out late.
And all throughout the day, you really just got to be planted in front of your computer, staring at the screen as the ticker rolls. But Dad, I'm going to throw it over to you. Who is your a number one guy where you're please go after this guy? And no, you can't steal the one that I had first. That's mine.
I did not change my list after I saw, I like that guy that you have on your list.
What can I say?
I just cut it out of yours and pasted it into mine, and then gave you somebody you never heard of.
Especially if you get to talk first, you can just jump on that one.
I wouldn't even scroll down to my section.
Exactly. You just read what I wrote. Exactly. You don't even need to copy and paste.
I didn't have to do any work.
You can just say it. Yeah. But
copy and paste is too much work.
Exactly. You just read it yourself. It's was that your section? That's my fault. My bad.
I lost track of where I was. Sorry.
I guess you did write that. But anyway, who's your first guy?
So I'm going with the number one free agent on everybody's board.
Man, it's going to be so hard to afford, but yes, I agree. It would be fantastic.
T. Higgins, wide receiver. He's only 26 years old. His projected contract is by PFF 4 years at $28 million per year, and by Spot Track 4 years at $25.4 million per year. Now, is that under selling? Is that projection too low?
He will get. So here's the thing. Here's the thing with T. Higgins. Besides the fact that he's been a little bit injury prone in his career, he missed a lot of time with hamstring injuries. The price is I think it's going to be so high. So think about it this way.
Right. It's a scarcity issue.
The free agent. So number one, the free agent class for wide receivers is not very good. Number one is T. Higgins. Then number two is probably Chris Godwin coming off a broken leg. And number three is probably Stephon Diggs coming off a torn ACL. So first of all, not a great free agency class for receivers. Second of all, price-wise, Brandon Ayuk, with a year left on his deal, last year got $30 million a year. T. Higgins is going to have so many suitors, number one. Number two is better than Brandon Ayuk. So it's going to be an actual bidding war. So I think the price starts at 30, and 33? Then with an actual bidding war, it could get up to 35. I would not be surprised if it got up to 35. Now that would be, I think, on the high end, but with everyone bidding for his services, with not a lot of available options at wide receiver, and a pretty weak wide receiver draft class, I feel like
right. That's another thing that's not getting maybe enough consideration in setting these
the market
estimates.
Yeah. And so with that, I think he's going to get north of 33 almost just as a baseline. And now I'm thinking 35 might not even be that crazy, just given the fact that you see all these other guys making 30 without a bidding war. People are going to be really, really, really all in on T. Higgins' services, and that's why I think it's maybe a little bit unlikely for the Packers. But like you mentioned, he's a fantastic player when he's healthy. But anyway, go on. He really is really good.
Yeah, so just to give a little context, I'm looking at Spot Track's rankings for 2025 contract average for wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, 35. CeeDee Lamb, 34. A.J. Brown, 32. Amon-Ra, 30. Ayuk, 30. Tyreek, 30. Waddle, 28.
And all those contracts that were already negotiated at those numbers were players with a year left on their deal. None of them made it to unrestricted free agency. And, I mean, there's still a chance that T. Higgins doesn't. There's been a lot of talk about, Joe Burrow putting some pressure on the Bengals organization to, sign him before they get to free agency. And maybe that happens, and then this doesn't really matter. But I think that if he makes it unrestricted free agency, it's going to be crazy money. And it's not to say, people will be like, oh, you can't give him 35. Justin Jefferson's making 35. He's not as good as Justin Jefferson. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all.
You should never consider that. It is what the market is this year.
Yes,
doesn't matter who's the best, because who's the best signed. The contracts keep going up.
Yep, it's like the quarterback market. Dak Prescott. We know Dak Prescott is not better than Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. He made $60 million because he was up, and they had to pay him that pretty much. And that's even it's even more than that, because it's going to be that, but other teams can upbid you and just like essentially just it's just the way that the market works. It's gonna get bid up. It's just gonna get bid up. But anyway, but yeah, T. Higgins. What do you think of T. Higgins as a fit? Why do you like him for the Packers?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, he's like number one ranking overall. So by PFF, he's 7th in the league last year in receiving grade. Only 26th in yards per route run. He's running a lot at 2.05. It's slightly, compared to Packers, slightly below Watson and Reed. 46.7 contested catch percentage, which is, top third, I think. 10th in the league in passer rating when targeted. He has a 70% catch rate. Only Reed was better than the Packers at 74.7. So I like to see those high catch rates. He averaged 4 first downs per game. He had 48 first downs in 12 games. The best on Green Bay was Dobbs at 2.4. I think that 4 per game is actually quite high. Something I had to calculate, but that even with only 12 games at 48, he was still in like the top 20. By NFL Pro, he was 9th amongst receivers in receiving EPA total, 15th in EPA per target, 13th in yards after catch over expected, 12th in catch rate over expected, 10th in receiving yards per game. So for all of these are better than anyone on Green Bay last year, except for EPA per target, where Reed was just 2 spots higher at 12th or 13th instead of 15th. Yeah, so he would immediately vault to being like the top
D1, the wide receiver one. It is essentially, he is, in my opinion, outside of like Devontae Adams getting released and you signing him and him staying healthy and still being able to produce at the age that he's at, outside of Devontae Adams, I think he is the only answer you can find right now to the Packers need a wide receiver one problem, where it's like he's the only guy that you could bring in and it's immediately like, okay, the Packers got their guy, like they have a wide receiver one. There are questions.
This would be like the AJ Brown trade that the Eagles made.
Exactly. And there are questions like, hey, like, he hasn't been a wide receiver one in the NFL, like really outside of his rookie year. And that was his rookie year. And because he's been across from Jamar Chase almost the entire time. So, can he handle that load? I don't really have those questions with him. I think there's an argument he has the best hands in the NFL, full stop. Like, just in terms of the ability to make contested catches, the ability to make difficult catches. He's got crazy movement skills for his size. I mean, he's huge. He's a huge dude. And I will say, I think this would be a no doubt. I don't know if there is a number where I'm like, oh, I don't know about that for the like. I don't. There are numbers where I'm like, I don't know if the Packers will pay that. I don't know if there's a number where I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would do that if I was Green Bay. I think price is no object in some sense for this one for me.
I think that would probably have the most transformative effect on the team. Mm-hmm. Because even though there are some weaknesses on the defensive side that we'll talk about and have suggestions for, the defense was mostly able to figure it out last year. The offense went through lulls where they couldn't get receivers to get open. Especially against man.
And it would. I think it would almost certainly instantly solve the man coverage issue that you had last year, where it's like, oh, like the other team's playing man, we have no solution because our guys can't get open, and we just have to throw into tight windows. And it's like we don't have guys who can really win contested catches. Like we're stuck. But yeah, no, I think he is definitely like the guy where it's like that instantly solves the biggest problem that we've had on offense. But yeah, I would be totally down for T. Higgins at whatever price point. My thing is just like, I don't think that they're going to feel that way about like paying a receiver $35 million a year, which
they might end up getting. Want to.
Yeah. For me, did you have anything else on T. Higgins you wanted to add? The other thing with T. Higgins, like I mentioned, hamstring injuries, has had a slew of hamstring injuries and soft tissue injuries. And that's a little bit scary to be paying a guy that much money. That's like the one thing where I do get a little bit of hesitancy there.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where if you're gonna sign him, send him to whatever you gave Christian Watson and Eric Stokes
to UW-Madison
immediately.
And get that treatment.
Second he puts pen to paper, immediately send him to UW-Madison and have him fix his hamstrings.
Yeah, so I was just looking up. You talk about his hands. His drop rate last year, only 2.7%.
His hands are crazy. It's
compared
fantastic.
To Jaden Reed, 14.5.
Yeah.
Watson, 6.5.
Dobbs,
9.4.
It would definitely.
Wicks, 18.
Knowing our luck, he would suddenly forget how to catch. But anyway, going over to my side of the free agency thing, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, mine was on the defensive side, and I think would tackle the problem that we have there of not having a whole lot of pass rush. And my number one guy was Osa Odighizuwa, who has been a defensive tackle for the Cowboys for the past 4 years. He's really a pass rush specialist, interior defensive lineman. Some numbers for you per PFF. He was 12th in the league in pressure rate and 6th in total pressures out of 164 qualifying interior defensive linemen last year. In 2023, he was 13th in pressure rate and 24th in total pressures out of 162 qualifying interior defensive linemen. So really, really high level pressure and pressure guy and pressure rate guy along the interior defensive line. Was also fourth amongst interior defensive linemen in quick pressures per NFL Pro last year. So the pressures he is getting are very impactful as well. So high pressure rate guy, really impactful pressures, questionable run defense. He was 93rd in run defense grade out of those 164 last year. I do think part of that is just that the Cowboys roster was not built to defend the run. He doesn't have any real impactful run defenders around him this past season. And, that kind of shows in the fact that in 2023, he was up at 36 out of 162 in run defense grade. So, he's been able to defend the run a little bit better than he showed this past year, even if he's not an impactful run defender. I think he also provides a lot of flexibility along the defensive line. Aside from around 600 snaps at defensive tackle, he is a little bit of an undersized defensive tackle, so he also played about 200 snaps at end last year. So he's a guy I think you could move around, move out to end, maybe on those. So have him out at end, maybe on some early downs, move him into defensive tackle, on some third downs. I think he could play a lot of different roles for you. He's only going to be 27 next season. I think he would really improve the Packers pass rush. Over the cap thinks he's going to make $13 million a year. I would be shocked if he's going to make that little. I think he's going to make substantially more than that. But I think he's a guy that, really shores up one of the weakest parts of your defense, which is the pass rush. And he's been really impactful for the Cowboys. And I think he should be A1 in terms of defensive players the Packers are looking at.
Yeah. And when I saw what you wrote, I looked him up. It's like, oh, wait, after I did all this analysis, I'd like him more.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the analysis you were doing on defensive players now?
So I wanted to get numbers on pass rush and try to figure out what was a good measurement for pass rush ability and see who would rise up with any surprising names or whether I could capture something that looked, like it made sense. So I made a combined measurement of pressure percentage, quick pressure percentage. So the number of pass rush snaps with a quick pressure, number of pass rush snaps with any kind of pressure, pass rush win rate, and true pass rush win rate. I also looked a little bit at the ability to convert pressures to sacks. So the conversion rate, that seemed a little noisier, where it wasn't tracking well with any of the other measurements. I mean, you say measure something different, but just to and then I made a single score for that. And so, like over the last 2 years, the players who are the best by this score over the Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Aiden Hutchinson, Trey Henderson, Nick Bosa. So a lot of the usual suspects.
And
for the rushers.
The score matches the eye test, matches the market value. So that kind of indicates that the score is kind of what you want. And I think the quick pressure rate is, maybe the most interesting thing to add in there, because it's something that's not a lot of places. A lot of places look at, just total number of quick pressures. But really, it was kind of a thing that we ran into this past year, is that even the guys who are getting pressures for the Packers were not getting them particularly quickly. Although Gary's quick pressure numbers are better than you actually realized over the course of the season. But it is an important thing. But anyway, so where does Osa Odighizuwa... Oh, go ahead.
So a little bit more... So one thing that was a little surprising, Brenton Cox came up as 20th last year. He doesn't make it into the last two average.
And that's 20th out of how many?
Out of 111.
Okay, yeah, top fifth.
And if you include so he was actually really good in pressure to sack conversion rate, number 1 overall in the league. Yeah, I guess up to like 14th. But so he was actually, even without that, had a quietly effective year. And if you look at the Packers overall, let's look at their pass rushers. So this is what I wanted to do this post to see what the Packers really measured up, and also to see if anybody surprising showed up. So over the last 2 years, combined average, Gary was 18th amongst edges, Enigbari was 47th among edges, and Lucas Van Ness was 72 out of 73. So the numbers of players that were represented in both years is less. So and then among interior defensive linemen, Devontae Wyatt was 10th. Kenny Clark was 22nd. Carl Brooks was 31st, and TJ Slayton was 46th.
Yeah, we know it. We know what TJ Slayton is. Fair enough.
However, last year, so that was a 2-year combined. Last year, Wyatt was 21st, Kenny Clark was 49th, Brooks was 55th, and Slayton was 73rd.
Yeah, which we kind of know,
75.
The Packers pass rush kind of lines up with what we feel about the Packers pass rush this year versus the year before.
Everybody was worse last year than the year before,
which is why they moved along.
Cox.
That's why they changed defensive line coaches in a lot of ways. So hopefully this coming year, it had more to do with defensive line coaching and less to do with the scheme and the fit in the scheme, and we can get some stuff there. But I do still think that you need to make an addition there. And so, you mentioned this score, kind of lines up with what you feel about, how the best edge rushers in the league look. Where did it have, though, Osa Odighizuwa amongst interior defensive linemen this past year? Because I think you were mentioning this to me earlier. It really does, stand out. Like, I think he is so underrated. I feel like he is such an underrated player along the defensive line. Packers could maybe have him for like a decent. I think he's going to cost more than that 13 mil. I think that's like a crazy, he's going to cost way more than that. But I think that the Packers should target him aggressively in this free agent class.
Yeah. So last year he was fourth, and in 2023 he was sixth, and in the 2 years combined he was, I think, third.
And he was third behind Chris Jones
and Quinnen Williams.
Exactly. And and those guys are obviously also more impactful run defenders. They're less one-dimensional players. But
this was only looking at pass rush.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. But my point is just that the reason those guys are who they are is because they can do it in multiple facets. No one is saying he's on those guys' level overall, because those guys are not one-dimensional players as Odighizuwa is. But what the Packers really need is an impact pass rusher, and so that's what I think that Odighizuwa could provide. But anything else you wanted to touch on there? Because we're getting kind of long on time, and we're only through 2 guys. So,
all right. So the guy I picked was another interior defensive pass rusher, Milton Williams for the Eagles, who just had a great Super Bowl.
Yeah, and just made himself a good amount of money in that Super Bowl.
Right. So he's only 25, almost 26. So he's 25.9 years old. His projected contract, so it depends on where you look. PFF has 4 years, 21 million. Spot Track has 3 years, 12 million. We're probably looking more at that 21 million number after the Super Bowl. His free agent ranking, he's 32nd overall in PFF, 16th overall on ESPN. So for last year in 2024, he had a great year. He was second in his pass rush metric behind only Chris Jones amongst all interior defensive linemen. He wasn't as good in 2023, which I'll get to. But if you break it down, the individual metrics, second in QB pressure rate, 25th in pressure to sack conversion rate, so that not so high. 13th in quick pressure frequency, 4th in pass rush win frequency, and 1st in true pass rush win rate. And then over the last 2 years combined, he's 8th. So second last year, 8th over the last 2 years combined. But in 2023, he was only 46th out of 77, so not nearly as good.
And he's a really impact explosive pass rusher. The question is would he look as good not playing next to Jalen Carter? And fair question. Yep. But it definitely was a standout along that defensive line. That was a big reason that the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Right. So, and pass rush is his calling card. His other cons, besides it's really a 1 year of excellence and previous years of kind of more middle of the league. Also, he has a very high missed tackle rate in 3 of his 4 years in the league.
Not great.
It was funny. Last year was 17.5, but his second year league, it was actually 0. Not a single missed tackle out of 37 chances. And the others 11%, 17%, 12%, and a 0, where he didn't miss a single tackle all year.
Mm-hmm.
And his run defense grades are also below average. 2 of the 4 years he's been in the league.
Yeah.
So there are some. It's not.
He's
not
more of a pass rush guy. Yeah.
So my vision is you have like one run stopper, Slayton-like.
Or Clark, and you just tell Kenny, "Hey, we're gonna just focus on plugging up the run."
And then the future is going to be Wyatt and Williams or Odigizua as your base and pass down
and
primary starters.
Then they're going to need Wyatt to maybe improve some of that run defense as well.
Because you need an elite run defender in the middle.
I just wonder about Wyatt.
Which Slayton was. Slayton was an elite run defender.
Yeah.
And so their run defense was pretty good. Wyatt.
That's the thing is like the run defense was so good last year. Like it really was really good last year that you just hope that you put some of these more designated pass rush type guys in there and the rest of the guys are able to carry the run defense while these guys give you a little bit more juice in the pass rush. And that's like the hope there. And, hopefully it's not a schematic thing where it's like, oh, we're focusing way too much on stopping the run and we can't rush the passer no matter who we have out there.
That crossed my mind.
Yeah.
Have we sacrificed too much pass defense to have a good run defense this year?
It's a fair question. All these other teams are able to do it, so hopefully we can figure it out. But yeah, no, he would be a really good get. He's definitely, I think, number 2 in terms of like the defensive interior guys that I would want behind Odigizua. They just need more juice in the pass rush. They really do. In terms of my next guy, though, this is kind of flipping over to the other side of the ball. Dylan Radunz, has been with the Titans. He's an offensive lineman. This is the guy that I'm like, he's not a star. He might not even be a starter. He had a solid season at right guard this last year per PFF of 101 qualifying guards. He was 31st in pressure rate allowed and 84th in run blocking grades, so a bit better of a pass protector than a run blocker. But I think his true value is in his versatility. In 2023, he played over 80 snaps at each of left tackle, left guard, and right tackle. So he has experience at 4 of 5 slots on the offensive line. I see it as a bit of a Billy Turner type signing. He's only going to be 27 years old, and I view him as like you bring him in, you have him as your 6th guy who's just your swing guy who can fill in at any single spot whenever you need him to. And he just provides better depth than they have because we talked about in our needs episode a few weeks ago. Their offensive line depth has like eroded. It's eroded away. They have no one there. Like Travis Glover, who looked really bad when he played, Jacob Monk, who they clearly did not want to play and was inactive most of the time, and Kadeem Telfort, who I don't know, he's fine, I guess. I don't know how to feel about him. He's okay, not great. They just
really
need a guy.
Only had 6 guys they felt comfortable playing, and then they lost one for the second half of the year. And then they didn't have anybody they really felt comfortable putting out there.
Yeah, and they looked lost out there. Yeah, and it showed that they didn't feel comfortable because they didn't even know. That was another thing. Why do you not have a plan for your next offensive lineman? You put Glover out there, and it's like, oh no, this is bad. And he lasts 2 series, and then you take him out.
And then you put Monk in, and he doesn't even make it for a single snap.
Yeah, you put Monk in as we're going to break with Myers injured, and it's like, wait a minute, you come back from break, Monk is not out there. I don't know how bad those snaps went, like we talked about. But I think he would not be terribly expensive. OTC evaluation's at $3.5 million. I think it's going to be a little bit more than that just because offensive lineman contracts generally get built up. Not a fantastic player, I don't think not a guy that you want starting necessarily. The Titans offensive line was a nightmare last year. And he was part of that. But I think he, would be a really good backup just because of his versatility, his ability to back up all 4 spots outside of center. You could always move one of those other guys. You got a lot of guys who can play center right now. And I think that, he would just be a really good depth piece on a line that is lacking depth right now.
Yeah, I think they need to add somebody. It doesn't even have to be a starter because they need depth. I went for also with my 3rd player, offensive lineman, though I'm thinking starter in this case, and that's Drew Dahlman, the center from Atlanta.
Yeah, this is if they don't bring back Myers, right? Is how you're feeling about it?
This is the option, right? See, I would say at center is probably they should go either Dahlman or Myers. I mean, I suppose they could get somebody in the draft but I don't know.
Well, I think the secret 3rd option is you bring in a guard and you move Elton there. Yeah, that's also a possibility. Yeah, maybe Radun's going to be the guard is going to be Morgan and Jenkins goes to center. Yeah. I think if they started the season today, with the roster that they have, I think it's pretty clearly Walker, Morgan, Elton, Ryan, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah, the players in the roster now, that would have to be their starting lineup.
Yeah, and I don't think there's not even a question in my mind that it would be any different than that. If like
the drop off after those 5 is
massive, which is why they need another guy out there. But anyway, tell us a little bit more about Dahlman.
Yeah, so his projected contract is 3 years, depending on where you look, $11.5 million per year per PFF or $6.8 million per year per Spotrac. For comparison, Spotrac has Myers at $7.7 million, so kind of similar, perhaps, contracts. His free agent ranking is 22 overall in PFF, and he's the number 1 center, and similarly number 1 center on ESPN. He had the number 5 offensive grade for all centers in the league from PFF, with a grade of 82.3. Mostly built on really good run blocking. He was number 6 overall in run blocking, only 23rd in pass blocking at 66.6. Now, compare these to Myers, who was 54.2 overall, Dahlman at 82.3. 50.9 against the run, Dahlman at 79.8, and pass blocking similar, 62.5 for Myers, 66.6 for Dahlman. So he's been a good to elite run blocker, and has struggled a little bit in pass blocking, especially the first 3 years. He actually got a little bit better, above average this year in pass blocking after being a little below average his first couple of years in the league.
Yeah, and there's some schematic overlap as well, between him, coming from the Falcons. The current OC there is Zach Robinson, who coached under McVay previously. So it's a McVay-like type thing where, he played center in that system. And, there's some clear overlap between, McVay and LaFleur. Obviously, they've worked together. Obviously, it's all Shanahan-y. There's obviously differences, but it's very similar. There's a lot of overlap. And so, you think that he would be kind of like center is where, schematic knowledge outside of quarterback is probably the most important. And so having some overlap there would definitely be important if you're bringing in an outside center, right?
Yeah. And athletically, he actually fits a lot of what they look for in offensive linemen more than Myers.
Yeah.
He's, kind of a elite 9.92 RAS, good speed, good agility, 3-cone end shuttle, and good vertical for a center, and a little bit shorter and shorter arms than average, which is kind of where the Packers have been finding good offensive linemen a lot of the time.
They seem to be wanting to go bigger recently in the past 2 or 3 seasons at line. You look at the Glover draft pick. You look at bringing in guys like Telford. The Myers draft pick where they clearly wanted some size. Morgan's a bigger guy. He's not exactly small. So I don't know. Is it?
But the same as his height is below average. Morgan's weight is actually in the middle. Well, a little bit above average, but 311, but good agilities. Myers is really kind of the outlier in some ways.
Yeah, but
and plus the undrafted free agents. They've gone for some giants there.
Yes,
Telford
yes.
And Jones
and I was gonna say who's the guy out of
Caleb
Indiana
Jones.
who's just the biggest man that they have ever seen in their entire life? No, yeah, it's Caleb Jones. But anyway, no, I think that adding a center in free agency would not be a bad idea at all. I just get this sneaking suspicion they're just gonna bring Myers back.
Yes, so we could say their free agent signing at center is going to be Myers.
Yeah. But I think even if they bring Myers back, I think they still need to add another guy because I think the depth is still bad.
I would agree. Even if they bring back Myers, then I would prefer your suggestion of Raduns rather than Dahlman.
Yeah, because then you just need a guy to be a swing piece, really,
right?
Who can play a bunch of different positions.
Positional versatility.
Exactly. My next guy on the list is another defensive player, Le'Veon Rizrique. He's also a pass rush specialist, interior defensive lineman. He was 21st.
I found a theme here.
Yeah, we just need pass rush and some line depth and pass rush again. The rest of my guys, I'm going to tell you now, are all pass rushers. He was 21st in pressure rate this past season out of 164 qualifying interior defensive linemen. He's a bit better of a run defender than Odighizuwa. He was 23rd in run defense grade last season. The difference between them is he's really more of a part-time player. He's only played above 50% of snaps 1 year of his career this past season, and a lot of that had to do with the Lions, having he played for the Lions last year. I forgot to mention the past few years. He is really more of a, part-time player. Only this past season he played over 50% of the snaps. Otherwise, he's never played over that many snaps in his career, mostly because of, just the Lions being wrecked up front in terms of, availability of their defensive linemen due to injury. He also missed all of 2022 with a back injury. So that's a little bit scary, but he's only going to be 27 next season. I think he would really contribute to the pass rush. I don't think he'd be that expensive. Over the cap has him evaluated at like $8 million. They always undervalue, so it'd probably be a handful of million more than that. But I do think, like we mentioned, 21st in pressure rate of those 164 qualifying interior defensive linemen would really help with the pass rush up front. I think on third downs, especially. And I think just, the theme of this episode is just get some more pass rush up front in free agency, because I don't think you can just rely on drafting like a Jared Verse. That doesn't happen that often. So yeah, I think that he would be a good fit there. Has some familiarity with the NFC North as well. So it'd be something that I would be interested in. Obviously, missing all of 2022 with a back injury is scary. But if the price isn't too high, I wouldn't mind taking the risk.
Yeah, and by my sort of combined metric, he was 26th last year, which is better than all the Packers D tackles except for Wyatt.
Yeah, so, just bring in a little more juice.
So I wouldn't hate it. I think I would like to see them add. They definitely need to add at least one pass rusher before the draft, whether it's an interior defensive lineman or an edge player.
And honestly, I know my first two guys were interior defensive. Yeah. And honestly, I know my first two guys were interior defensive linemen. Edge is a bigger need, in my opinion. I just think that the interior defensive linemen that are available in free agency are better than the edge rushers. And in my opinion, Odigizua can do a little bit of both.
Since this is a free agent and not a trade episode.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not allowed to put Myles Garrett. You're not allowed to put Max Crosby. I would not mind trading 2 firsts for either of those guys. I just want that on record. Wouldn't mind it at all. Would actually, in fact, be ecstatic about it. I will say I don't think it's going to happen, just because I think it's going to take at least 2 firsts. Number one, the Packers probably won't do that. Number two, I think a lot of teams are going to offer 2 firsts, and the Browns/Raiders would just be interested in other teams' firsts more than the Packers.
Yeah, so see, maybe the players will be like, I want to go somewhere.
I don't think they're going to. The teams aren't going to care. I don't think it's going to matter. But anyway, who's your next guy?
I don't know if either of them have a trade clause in the contract. But anyway, so I did go with an edge player, and I thought about this a lot about who I was going to pick. At first, I was going to pick Josh Sweat, because he just actually absolutely wrecked shop and probably made himself an extra $30 million.
Yeah, exactly. In the Super Bowl, you could have argued before the fourth quarter that he was going to win Super Bowl MVP with how unblockable he was.
But when I looked at the season-long numbers and the numbers for the year before, it actually wasn't that great in terms of how he stacked up. So I went with another guy who's not going to make as much money. I don't think Chase Young. He's also still relatively young at 25.8. So maybe I think Sweat will be 28 before the season starts. So he's a couple years older. Young's projected contract is by PFF is 2 years at $17.5 million per year, or Spot Track 4 years at $17.5 million per year. And while I think there's a good chance that Sweat is going to make like 20 something, regardless of what the various sites say, because I think those were done before the Super Bowl.
I'm gonna tell you now, it's gonna be more than 20 something. Like it's gonna be a lot.
Well, 20 something is. I mean, I was thinking 25.
Well, I guess 20.
Think it's gonna be over
20.
30?
You could be high 20. I think it's gonna be high 20s. I guess 20s. Not over 30s, but I think it's gonna be high
20s. So Young, last year in the that combined pass rush metric amongst edge rushers, he was 21st in 2024. He was in the individual metrics. He was 14th in QB pressure rate, 26th in quick pressure rate, 33rd in pass rush win rate, and only 49th in true pass set win rate. He was better in 2023 than 2024. He was 16th overall in 2023 for the combined score. And over the last 2 years, he was 16th best in the 2 years combined, I should say.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. he's one of those guys where I feel like the numbers always look better than like when I'm actually watching him. Like when I'm actually watching him, I'm like, I don't really notice Chase Young out there. And then I look at the numbers, it's like, oh, he's like top 15 in pressure rate. He's like top 15 in this, and this. And I'm like, he's an odd case study to me.
Yeah. So for comparison, for other players I was thinking about, his 2024 ranking is better than Josh Sweat, Khalil Max, Son Reddick's, or Deo Odeyingbo. Other players who are ahead of him in a lot of the free agent rankings. And I think another one, though, Browning, who is somebody who's ranked a little bit ahead of him.
I do have Browning. I can transition to talking about him unless you had anything more you want to talk about. I just want to say
a few cons about Young. His run defense grade has dropped each of the last 4 years with a below average.
He knows what he's getting paid to do. He said, I'm getting paid to rush the passer and not anything else. No one looks at these run defense grades when they're looking at the contracts, my guy.
Yep. So that's another pass rush specialist, essentially.
Which, the Packers do need. And speaking of pass rush specialists and speaking of Baron Browning, he's actually my next guy. So you kind of you teed me up quite well. He's also, I think, a pass rush only guy. He was 54th out of 159 edge rushers in pressure rate in 2024. He was 28th of 148 in 2023, so back-to-back nice pressure years. He also had 16 quick pressures last year, which is quite a few. As a pass rush specialist guy, for reference, Gary had 20. He was traded from Denver to the Cardinals last year for a 6th round pick, for a late pick. Never been a high sack guy, but can get pressures in a complementary role. Only played about 46% of snaps last year, which is, I don't think you want his role to be much more than that. You want him as a rotational edge rusher guy. I view him as like an upgrade on like an Enagbare, in that, he's like your third guy and he's just able to play better than Enagbare, frankly, was last year. I don't think he would be all that expensive. He was just traded for a 6th last year. Now, part of that is the fact that, he was on an expiring contract and, it was only a rental. So that's part of the reason it was only a 6th. But he's young. I think he'd give you a little bit more juice off the edge. He would not be that expensive. And I think it would be, a nice addition to the rotation at pass rusher, because right now it's along the edge. It's Gary and who? Right? Like it's Gary and Bretton Cox. Right. Is he your next best guy? Like hopefully Lucas Van Ness improves next year, but right
now it's been Cox who was the next best guy. He was the first best guy.
But
it was limited role,
limited snaps.
We'll see if it holds up to. Sometimes things are not scalable.
Yeah, exactly. And also when you're in a limited role, you're rushing on third downs a lot more, which makes it easier to rush the passer. But yeah, so I just think that you need to improve the 2 through 4 guys a lot. And so I think bringing in a guy like Browning would not be the worst thing in the world at like a low level contract.
Yeah. And in 2024, he was 14th best edge in that combined metric.
Yeah, he can rush the passer. He's like the only reason the Broncos moved him to the Cardinals is they just had like kind of a backlog of edge rushers with Cooper popping off there. And so I could see him, just getting kind of lost in the shuffle there. And then, when you're on the Cardinals, there aren't not a lot of other guys helping you along that pass rush with the Cardinals. So hopefully, not that there are a lot with the Packers either, but he would be, I think, a nice addition to the depth at edge. But Dad, who's your next guy?
So I have gone to a different part of the field now, and I went with a corner.
Oh, and this is your fifth and final guy.
I first started going to a list like Tommy's already got 4 pass rushers on there.
Yes.
Who am I going to pick now?
It might be a hint at what I think we need. Some pass rush, please.
So then I went with Paulson Adebo, corner.
I wouldn't hate it. I looked at him as well. I will say, Dad, what if I told you he broke his femur this year? Would that do anything to dissuade you from putting him here?
Because I was looking.
I can double check, but it was not that long ago. I was looking at it and I was like, "Oh, Paulson Adebo would be a really good fit." But then he broke his femur in October. So if he wants to take this is like the perfect cheap 1-year prove it deal corner contract to like battle it out. Because I think what we need. And because I'll let you go next, but I do want to just add that as important context. I think it would be a cheap 1-year prove it deal, battle it out with Carrington Valentine and Keyshawn Nixon, the two of those three guys is going to take that outside corner job. And I think it'd be a nice little 1-year rental to give you a little bit of corner depth. But I do have, I don't think you'd want to give him a long-term contract coming off such a massive injury.
Yeah, he had a decent year last year, but it wasn't fantastic by some measures, though. So he was 54th amongst cornerbacks in PFF coverage grade, 63.9, a little bit above average. He was tied for 23rd amongst corners with 7 pass breakups last year. For Nixon led Green Bay with 6. He was also 5th in passer rating against, giving up a rating of only 67. Last year, Jair led Green Bay with a passer rating against of 79.9. So he's already, even last year, better than anybody on Green Bay was in the cornerback room last year. So, I'm hoping.
Yeah, he's a good player when he's healthy. The question is just about, what is he going to look like this coming year? And that's why I don't think you give him a long-term one, but a nice little prove it 1-year deal, come in. You know who I was thinking of the other day? This is going to turn into a guys naming dudes section of the podcast. I was thinking about Bashaud Breeland the other day. Wonder what he's up to.
Yeah, speaking of guys who had weird injuries.
Yeah,
where he had the cut his heel open and
had some kind of infection, and then failed the physical with the team, and then came in and then took a 1-year deal with the Packers, I think it was, and was pretty good. It was just a 5-year
and then he went and played for the Chiefs, I think, after the Packers. And too.
And so Paul Saniba, a little bit of a Bashaud Breeland type, signing.
A broken femur is an unusual injury.
Yeah, it's like a car crash type injury. That's that's a scary injury.
Drink some more milk.
Yeah, exactly. Dude. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that injury ended up happening in October, although I do want to just double check that really quick.
His last game was week 7.
Yeah, so I think, and he ended up missing the rest of the season off of that. And yeah, I mean, it's a devastating injury. It's the biggest bone in your body. And missed the rest of the season. So, hopefully he's healing up well and he'll be okay, but wouldn't hate a 1-year prove it deal. My final guy, though, is another pass rusher, who you also already mentioned, and I'm not crazy about this, but I think he'd also be a decent depth piece, is Dayo Adeyingbo. Has been with the Colts the past few years. Only 83rd out of 159 edge rushers last year in pressure rate, 119th of 148 in pressure rate in 2023. The pressure rates aren't great for PFF, but he does have a lot of quick pressures this past year, 14 of them. So maybe you could just get some more juice, some more quality pressures out of him. Only had 3 sacks last year, but did have 8 sacks in 2023. I don't think he would be terribly expensive. I think he could be another depth guy. You never know, these edge rushers who are young. And he was a pretty high draft pick, so it could just be that people still have, a high opinion of him. And he might get, more money than you'd expect, as opposed to like Baron Browning, because OTC has him valued at like $8 million, where they have, Browning valued at $3 million. And so I'm kind of surprised, because I feel like Browning's just been the better player the past couple of years. But wouldn't hate a flyer on a Adeyingbo as like another edge rush depth guy, even though the numbers aren't great, just because he does get some quick pressures, and so maybe you unlock a little bit more out of him and get a little more juice there.
Yeah, I think adding some guys who could maybe improve what we're getting from some of the depth players who are, frankly, been near the bottom of the league.
And Nagbury was really tough. It was really rough last year.
He took a big step back. Yeah. Of course, a lot of the players did last year. Van Ness didn't take much of a step back because he was near the bottom of the league both years.
Hard to take a step back. Not a lot of room left there.
So we need to add somebody as good as Gary.
Yeah.
And it would be better if it was even somebody with a better
this isn't the trade podcast, but I would not hate 2 firsts for Garrett at all, like I mentioned. But
he's number 1 over the last 2 years by
a lot
metric.
Yeah.
So he's up at the top in almost all metrics. One thing I found about Adeyingbo, I was looking for updates. So in early January, he said he should be ready by training camp.
Okay. Yeah, and I just think it'd be like a 1-year prove it deal, which I wouldn't hate at all. But anyway, any final things that you want to touch on with these free agency things, Dad, or should we wrap it up?
What do you want to touch on? Everybody's going to want to come to Green Bay because...
Hey, you never know. Josh Jacobs is on the recruiting trail. Did you see Keyshawn Nixon tweeted at Devontae Adams to tell him to come through? I think he tweeted Max Crosby too.
He may have also...
Nixon and Jacobs are on their recruiting grind right now. Yeah.
Bringing in some ex-teammates.
I wouldn't hate it at all. But anyway,
if we added like Devontae and Max Crosby,
okay, well, it's just
why not?
I mean, why not? Sure. I wouldn't hate it. It would be an A+ offseason. Not I wouldn't hate it. It would be an A+ offseason if they could bring in, if they traded 2 firsts and a second for Crosby or Garrett, and then sign Devontae Adams after he gets released. A+ offseason. Don't need to do anything else.
No,
but anyway. Yeah, I mean, we're living in fantasy land, though. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. It's true. It is the offseason. And speaking of the offseason, thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be doing an episode every single week for the entire offseason, so keep it tuned to here. We'll be talking about the draft a little bit coming up, probably doing our first mock draft next week, so keep an eye out for that. Talking about, the combine coming up, so that'll be interesting. Talking about free agency, like we mentioned, the free agent legal negotiation period is the 10th to the 12th, so keep your eye out for that. We're only a month away. Draft coming up the month after that, so we'll be locked in on that. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening. Please subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Please leave a comment, leave a review, tell a friend. We'd really appreciate it. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer. Whenever updates on whenever we have new episodes out, content from other Packers content creators, roster move, news, coaching related news, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.